Okay, so today we're going to start with our fabric pieces here. We have 2 main, 2 lining, all the same size, and 2 strap pieces, both the same size obviously, and then these can be any size that you want. I chose these sizes based on the finished size of the bag that I wanted it to be, but again, this is totally optional. You can use any sizes here that you want to, as long as you have 4 pieces that are the same, 2 main and 2 lining, and 2 strap pieces that are the same. Okay, so let's get to sewing. Okay, so we're at the ironing board here, and we're just going to take one of our strap pieces and fold it in half lengthwise and iron that to make a memory crease. And then you open it up and fold it back on itself. You can go all the way to that memory crease, or in this case, because I have a patterned fabric, I'm going to use these little checkered squares to measure how far I'm going to fold in and just go straight on that line. But normally you would go all the way to the middle of your memory crease there. Or again, sky's the limit, however wide you want your strap to be. And just iron that down. And then you're going to do the same exact thing for the other raw edge. You're going to fold it toward the center, and this is what it will look like when you do both sides. Iron that down. Try not to iron over your memory crease. And then you're going to take that piece, fold it back in half, give it a good press all the way down. Okay, then head over to the sewing machine and you're just going to sew a top stitch around the entire strap, about an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, now get your main fabric piece and lay it right side up and measure about 2.5 inches from the raw edge. Now again, this is optional. Your placement of your strap is totally up to you. Just make sure you do the same thing on both sides. Go over to the other side. I'm measuring 2.5 inches again from that raw edge. And this is just going to depend on the size of your bag. So if you have a wider bag, you might want to go further from the edge to place your straps. So once you get that 2.5 inch mark, or however much you want to measure, you're going to line up the edge, the outer edge of your strap with that mark, and just make sure that both sides are the same all the way up. Again, mine's 2.5 inches. So then you're going to pin that in place so that it doesn't move around on you while you're sewing it. So keep in mind here that we are not going to sew all the way up. We're going to only sew these straps up to about 3 inches from the top. So I'm just kind of eyeballing it here, so that's about right there is where we're going to stop with these stitches. About 3 inches, and of course you want to mark it or measure it somehow, however it works for you. So when you come over to the machine here, you're just going to stitch right on top of that top stitching that you already put on the straps, just making sure that your straps don't move around on your fabric, and keep an eye on where you want to stop. Pull your pins out as you go so that you don't break your needle like I have in the past. Some machines will sew straight over the needle with no problem, but it is risky, so do that at your own risk. So here I have it marked with a pin about 3 inches from the top. I just put a pin in place instead of using a fabric marker. I hate putting fabric marks on my fabric because sometimes it doesn't wash out, so I use pins to mark it sometimes. So turn your fabric and just sew straight across there. Again, you're going to pivot your fabric, but keep your needle down so your fabric doesn't move around on you. Just lift up your presser foot and just sew straight down, again on top of that top stitching that you already have on your straps. Alternatively, what you could have done here is, before you top stitch the straps, after you iron them, you simply just attach them with pins to your main fabric, and then you'll top stitch them onto the bag. Really, either way you do it is fine. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like here. I have finished both sides. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to reinforce these straps, making an X with our sewing machine, just to give it just an extra reinforcement. So, come back to the machine and you're just going to sew a square here, and once you get to that other edge, just pick it up and move it to where you can sew straight over to the other corner to your stitch line, and then you're going to turn and pivot your fabric again, reinforce that top stitch that you did when you were sewing the strap onto the main fabric. So you're just going to maneuver it how you want it here. I got a little turned around, so I'm going to go back over that top stitch line from where we added the strap to the fabric, pivot, and then pivot it to where you can go at an angle again and just make an X across where you've already went down at an angle. Get your threads out of the way so you don't get anything caught in your machine, and just sew straight over to that other corner. Make sure you back stitch to finish this off, and then you're going to do the same thing on the other strap. So this is what it's going to look like, your reinforcement here. Alright, so now you see we have about 3 inches from the top raw edge of our fabric down to the strap placement where we reinforced there. So now we're going to take some interfacing. I use a lightweight fusible interfacing so that I can iron it on. We're going to put it on the back of the main fabric, and just follow your instructions. All of them are a little bit different. We're going to go to the ironing board and iron this on so it'll stay in place. Okay, so I have it ironed on here. It's going to help keep its shape. Now right here I have taken my other strap and just laid it on top of this piece before I'd attach it, just to make sure that they're the same size, and they still are, so they look good. Alright, so you just repeat all those steps for the other side, and then you're going to lay the 2 pieces together, right sides together, and we are going to stitch them down both sides and bottom, leaving the top where the straps are open. So use a 1/4 inch seam allowance for this part. Alright, so I've got it stitched together. You see the top is still open. So now we're going to do the same exact thing to the lining fabric, except we're going to leave an opening at the bottom about 3 or 4 inches long right here so that we can turn it when we're finished. So there's our opening at the bottom. Alright, so now we're going to take this lining fabric and the main fabric, and I'm going to serge these edges with my serger just to reinforce the sides of these. I'm going to leave that bottom part open. I'm not going to serge over that bottom part. This just helps, to keep holes from happening. Pencils, makeup, basically anything sharp that could punch a hole. This overlocker will help give it a little bit extra protection. Just remember, when you do that bottom raw edge, do not sew over that opening in your lining. That's very important for turning. Okay, so now we're going to box out the bottom of our bag. I'm measuring 2 inches from that top corner. Actually, it's the bottom corner of your lining. And then I'm just going to draw a line across here and sew over that line. So I've done this to all 4 corners to box off the bottom. And I'm going to take and serge over these edges, again, just to keep extra layer of protection. So now I'm going to insert my main fabric into the lining with right sides together, tuck those straps down in, get them out of the way. And then line up your side seams here and clip it or pin it, whichever you feel more comfortable with, just to keep your side seams together. I use hair clips. They come off really nicely when you've got the fabric in the machine. You can pull them off really nice. They don't get stuck on your fabric. So line everything up here, and sew. You're going to sew 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around this top edge to seal these together. And keep in mind you still have this opening in the bottom of your lining for flipping when we're done. So here I'm just finishing that top raw edge with my 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is what it looks like when we're done. And then we are going to pull through that hole in the bottom of the lining and pull that main fabric out so that we can finish off that bottom raw edge of the lining. We are almost done with the bag. Be really careful when you are pulling that out of that hole at the bottom of your lining that you go slow so that you don't stretch or distort that fabric. Okay, so right here, just poke out these corners really nice so that you can see where you need to sew here. And you can change out your thread right now and make it match this lining, or you can leave it the same as it is. I have a black thread in there right now. I'm just going to leave it in because it's the lining and it's the bottom and no one's going to see it. Sew across there with the top stitch, and this is what it looks like. So we're going to tuck that down into the main fabric. You just have to play with the fabric here a little bit, poke out those corners with your fingers, and get this lined up really nice and even at the edges here so that you can take it to the ironing board and iron out these seams really nice before you put a top stitch on there. So just play with it a little bit. It can be a little finicky, but it's worth it. Do not skip that step of ironing before you top stitch. Okay, so I'm going to change out my bobbin thread. I decided to leave the black on top, orange on the bottom, so that when I do this top stitch, it's going to match my fabric. So this is what it looks like when it's done. See, I have the orange on the inside and the black on top. Okay, so this is what our finished bag looks like. So cute. This one's a little tall and skinny, which I love for a trick-or-treat bag. And you could stop here, but we're not going to. I'm going to fold this fabric down at the top. Just a little extra design tip here. Fold it down, clip it, just till it meets where we stopped at sewing the straps on. Turn it over, do the same thing on the other side, just fold it down. You've got lots of layers of fabric right here to work with, so this is going to fold really nicely. It's not very hard to work with at all because it's so thick. And once we get this folded down, we're going to take it to the machine and just put a top stitch along that bottom folded edge right there above the straps. And I'm going to use my black on top still and orange thread on the bottom so that the lining is still orange, but that top part I'm going to put a little pop of color and use black right there. So just make sure if you do that, you keep it really nice and straight. Alright, so here we go. This is our finished bag. And I think I'm going to go ahead and add a snap to the top. Again, completely optional. Sky's the limit. You can add snaps. You could add a buttonhole and pop a little button in there. I'm going to use these metal snaps because I absolutely love them. I chose pewter to go with the black. And I'm going to just measure right in the center here, place a little mark. I'm measuring in between the straps, right at the center there. It's about 5 inches from each side of the outer side of the strap, so I'm going to go right at 2.5 inches in the center. Flip it over, do the same thing on the other side. I'm not going to show you how I install the snaps. There's many different kinds of snaps. They're all different, and your instructions are going to come with whichever ones you order. But here's our finished bag. I absolutely love it, and I hope you do too. I'm going to place the measurements for this bag that I made in the comments, but again, you can use any size that you want.